I want to get some more detail on what Grant Shapps has just announced. The Transport Secretary saying that from April the 6th, lorries that visited England from outside the UK for more than 2 days will need to take a COVID test within 48 hours and one after every 72 hours after. Let's speak to Rod McKenzie, Managing Director of Policy and Public Affairs at the Road Haulage Association. Thank you for joining us this morning, Mr. McKenzie. Why wasn't this happening before?
Hello, Tom. Well, in a way,
Hi.
It was. And I'll try and explain what's happened. You'll cast your mind back to December, just before Christmas, when the French insisted that any lorry driver coming from Britain to France would have to have a COVID test. So the British set up a pretty thorough and elaborate mechanism for testing using lateral flow tests, lorry drivers on the outbound journey. And of course, what's happened since then is cases have surged in France, and the French are now dropping their requirement for lorry drivers to test on the way into France, and we're doing it the other way around. So in other words, lorry drivers coming from France from April the 6th will have to have COVID tests. What does this mean? It really means very little, because lorry drivers are already doing COVID tests and having those tests done, and they'll be tested at exactly the same places that they're currently being tested at.
How much is it impacting the speed with which business can get done if lorry drivers are having to have all these tests all the time?
Not much is the answer. Initially, there was chaos, wasn't there? Because we didn't have the infrastructure set up, and lorry drivers were facing huge delays. Since then, we've got our act together, and there is a good system which works well. And when drivers test positive, they have to have a second test, and if that is positive, then they have to go into isolation. And that system works well. And in terms of your question, which is, are there delays as a result of that? The delays are minimal, frankly.
And can truckers do the test themselves, either before they go out or as they're coming in?
Well, the idea is that they need a test if they're staying in Britain for longer than 48 hours. So the smart way of doing that clearly would be to use one of the many sites that are set up that these lorry drivers will know already, because they're having to do this now, and go there. What is absolutely true is on the other side of the channel, the French side, there isn't really an infrastructure for doing this. So it's not practical for the French to do the testing. We have to let the lorries in the first place, then test the driver, and then take appropriate action.
I just wonder, in thinking about how this is managed, this testing is managed in the wider society, that perhaps, you know, where truckers go, the country could ultimately follow, that you have these regular points that people get tested at in order to go and undertake other activities. Because as you say, it doesn't seem to impact on their business all that much. It can be done quite efficiently and effectively.
Well, I think it's like everything, isn't it? When you start doing something new, it's unfamiliar and tricky and difficult. The more you do it, especially if you're doing it, you know, several times a week potentially, it becomes part of the daily routine. It might not be something you're terribly keen on. It's a bit unpleasant having things shoved up your nose, but by and large, truckers live with it and get on with it, and it works. And of course, it keeps the supply chain going, because that's the most important thing. We need that all-important supply chain. We're a country that relies on imports, so we've got to have a good flow of stuff coming in, and as little disruption as possible.
Very good to speak to you. Rod McKenzie, Managing Director of Policy and Public Affairs at the Road Haulage Association. Thank you very much indeed for your time this morning.